Hello, everyone. Wanted to welcome you to our session today. We're all very excited to be here. First, I want to say a big welcome to everybody joining us today, and an even bigger thank you to the amazing group of panelists that we have today that took the time out of their day to share with us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We've got Image Rights, CDAS, SmartFrame, Pick Rights, Bria, Ipsy Visuals, Shutterstock, and Google. So thank you so much for sponsoring this event, which I think we're all really excited to be part of. I'll give you an opportunity to meet some of our panelists here shortly, but first I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Janelle. I am the Director of Sales at Stocksy United. A coworker of mine had been involved with the DMLA for several years, and when an opportunity came up to join the Conference Planning Committee, I jumped at it. So big thanks to everybody from the DMLA for being so welcoming. They're a very accomplished, knowledgeable, and excellent group of people from all different backgrounds. I come almost exclusively from working with clients at Stocksy's. I'm certainly not a creative, and given a camera, I'm sure I wouldn't even be able to hold it. But this group made me feel very welcomed. So when I started thinking about the type of session I wanted to put together, I started thinking about some of the needs from some of our clients, and the ask and need for diversity has always been kind of front and center. And the more we dug into it as a company, the question always came up about how can we fill those needs in a sustainable and ethical way that really puts underrepresented creators in the forefront. So that's what really drove the process behind this session. And I had the privilege to know or be introduced to a lot of these panelists. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the issues that are facing our underrepresented creators, what companies and photographers are doing to move past these issues, and how we can all support, and as the name suggests, how we can elevate creators. So thanks again for being here. I'm now going to introduce our panel. I've asked them to put together a little introduction and include why the topic's important to them. So maybe we will start with Tara Pixley, who I've had the absolute pleasure of working with in a couple different contexts here. So Tara, maybe you can start with introducing yourself and a little bit about why you joined us today.
Of course, happy to. Thank you so much, Janelle, for leading us today. And thank you to the DMLA for having us here. And thank you to everyone who is joining us. I know you have a lot of options and are very busy, so it's wonderful to be able to share space together. I'm Tara Pixley. I'm a queer Jamaican-American photojournalist, and I'm based in LA. I'm also an associate professor at Loyola Marymount University, where I teach visual storytelling, photography, video, and critical and ethical issues in journalism. And I also I work primarily in reportage and editorial and portraiture, especially for editorial and nonprofit clients, but I also do lifestyle commercial work, and I love photographing or filming dance whenever possible, though I don't always get to do that. And I focus a lot on telling stories, working as a photojournalist and doing community storytelling around LGBTQ plus and immigrant communities of color. And so part of what is important to me is, not just having representations of diverse people from diverse backgrounds and various experiences, life experiences and knowledges and expertise behind the camera, but making sure that we have a really collaborative and thoughtful connection between content creators, visual media creators, so photographers, filmmakers, whatever your medium or format is, but having a really thoughtful connection between the folks who are creating the content and the people that we are documenting, filming, photographing. And I think that elevating underrepresented creators is really about, it's about access, it's about retention, it's about inclusion and equity, but it's also about rethinking and reframing how we do this work, how we come to it, and how we think about our relationship to the people in our imagery. So that is a big portion of what I do. And I will say that I had the opportunity to meet Jen and Janelle and many other amazing people at Stocksy through my work as curator in residence at Stocksy in 2021. So I had a lot of really great opportunities to help Stocksy and to work with Stocksy as that organization that was already really wonderfully thinking about equity work and inclusion work to continue to expand how they can elevate underrepresented creators. And I'm really excited to talk through more of those ideas here with you all today.
That's great. Thanks, Tara. I really liked how you were talking about reframing how the relationship kind of works between all people involved here. Next, why don't we move on to Rita Harker? Rita, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here with us today.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So much of a pleasure to be here today. And I am a photojournalist originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but I have recently moved to New Orleans, Louisiana. And I work mainly in editorial work, doing different stories for publications, traveling around, stories of injustices, self-identity, things like that. But the work that is really close to my heart are those local stories in my neighborhood that I find, and just celebrating the narratives of just everyday people. And my work mainly celebrates everyday Black people in communities, whether that's entrepreneurship, the personal stories and circumstances of how they've come to be in their individuality. So this panel means a lot to me in that sense, because I do believe that certain stories are not represented properly, and we need more nuance, especially when it comes to telling Black stories within the media. So.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Rita.
Thank you.
Tracy.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here as well. My name is Tracy Woods. I am the director of photography at The Loop. And prior to joining The Loop, I was a photo editor and photo researcher in editorial media and book publishing. I worked with Essence Magazine, Ebony Media and Style Specials, Billboard, Wiley Publishing, a whole slew of publications, both full-time and freelance. And at The Loop, we are all industry veterans. You know, we've worked in different aspects of the industry, and we've worked with thousands of talented women photographers from diverse backgrounds all around the world. And we've also worked with visionary brands, yet who are always looking for authentic perspectives to bring to their stories to life. Yet somehow women and non-binary photographers are still underrepresented in commercial content. And we hope to, that's why The Loop is here. We hope to bring them together at The Loop, bring brands and photographers together.
That's awesome, Tracy. I've been digging into The Loop ever since I got introduced to you, and it sounds like a really fantastic business model. Then moving on to Jen. Jen and I are co-workers over at Stocksy. So Jen, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what we do.
Thanks, Janelle. So my name is Jen Grantham. I am representing Stocksy here today. So I joined Stocksy, actually, it'll be a decade in February. First as a photographer, and then I joined their staff as an editor, and now my role is the artist relations director. So we, artist relations is kind of a group of 4 different teams that deal with mentorship and support for our existing artists, as well as recruiting and onboarding new artists, and then overseeing the collection and curation. So a couple different things. What attracted me to Stocksy was that I felt that it solved for a lot of problems in the licensing industry. As a co-op, it's actually owned by all of the members. Members have a say in how the business is run. There's higher royalty rates, also dedicated mentorship and support from the team. And I just also find the collection very pleasant to look at. And overall, I just felt that it was a fair way of doing business. But it's not really fair if it only applies to a small subset or demographic of people. So like Tara was talking about, developing relationships between creators and the people they're documenting. I'm also very concerned about relationships between creators and the licensing organizations and clients as well, and making sure that everybody's being represented and having the opportunity to tell their story and to benefit from fair business practices.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen, and thanks again for everybody's involvement here. I'm already very excited to learn a whole bunch more in the rest of our session here. So maybe we'll just move on to the next question. And so this is a question that when I started thinking about kind of topics for us to talk about, it sounded like a fairly simple question. The more I thought about it personally, the more I realized it has a lot of different perspectives involved. So I think the first question we'll kind of tackle is, with the topic being elevating underrepresented creators, who in your opinion are the underrepresented creators, and what sort of factors come into play with determining that? Anybody want to start?
I'll take a stab at that.
Perfect.
So,
Thanks, Casey.
oh, can you hear me? So photography, as we all know, has been traditionally a male-dominated industry, or heavily male-dominated. And today, women make up probably almost half of working photographers, yet they earn on average 40% less than their male counterparts. And then less than 25% of those are commercial photographers represented by industries leading. Well, 25% of those commercial photographers are represented by the industry's leading agents are women. So the opportunities for them are diminishing. And then when you think about that, only a small percentage of those are non-white photographers. So it even gets smaller. So it's, for me, it's women and non-binary creators, but it's also people of color. When you start comparing those stats and what you see out in the world, it's just a very small percentage. Obviously at the Loop, we are concerned with getting female and non-binary photographers work, but also people of diverse backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different genders. It all kind of interplays with our mission.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Rita, do you have anything to add to that of who the underrepresented creators are?
Absolutely. I definitely agree with what Tracy was just saying about it being white male dominated, especially within the field of photojournalism and editorial work. Especially even when you were talking about assignments that come from our communities. I think that you definitely need a diverse array of creators who actually come from those communities and from those backgrounds to actually cover those stories, to be able to give that intimate lens and that intimate look to the story. So I definitely agree.
I want to add that I think, of course, completely on board and co-sign what Tracy and Rita are sharing. I also think it's important for us to think about this as a very situated question. Like Rita mentioned, thinking about the communities when we're doing visual storytelling and photojournalism, who the underrepresented creators are going to be particular to the spaces within which they're working. Because yes, on every level across the board, women and people of color are underrepresented. In other places, I think socioeconomic status, or in other spaces of the industry, your access and ability to access the photo industry or film industry is really impacted by just, are you working class? Do you come from generational wealth? And the intersection of being a person of color, a woman or non-binary, photographer, creator of color, and coming from a working class background, that's going to be level upon level of difficulty in entering the field and maintaining a successful career, because the creative industry isn't really set up to support people who are coming from working class backgrounds. It's really set up to be a space that works well if you're coming from generational wealth. So I really like to think about it as through this kind of intersectional lens of who is being impacted, who's being, not allowed entry or access to this space based off of all of these different axes of identity and, different relationships to the world, to the environment, coming from different backgrounds. So I think that, the kind of question of who are the underrepresented creators, we have to constantly ask ourselves, what is keeping someone out of the space, and then from that understand better how we can then help make it more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about that question as well, is that it is very kind of situational and changes over time and very dynamic as well. So I appreciate everybody's answers there. Jen, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, I think that they all covered it really well. I like what Tarlin was saying about also considering socioeconomic backgrounds. We also have at Stocksy, language is an issue as well. So anyone who doesn't come from an English speaking background, people who might not have access to the same technology or gear. But at Stocksy, we don't track a lot of demographic information, but what we do know is that our co-op is primarily, it was about 80% European white men up until recent years. So basically anybody outside of that group is how we're looking to grow in our end.
Yeah. I know there's been a lot of efforts, and we'll kind of dig into some of those in a bit here. Really appreciate everybody's context on that answer. So now that we kind of have a better understanding of the who, I'd love to move on to really digging into what are some of the issues facing these underrepresented creators. And Tara, you mentioned a few of them when it comes to kind of socio and economic issues and that sort of thing. But what other kind of issues are preventing the industry from seeing more from these types of creators?
Well, if I may, oh, go ahead, Rita.
Well, I was going to say, personally, from someone who's had a very non-traditional entry and journey into the space of editorial photography and journalism in general, I can give a little bit of my story because I was always out documenting in my community, just taking portraits of people that I found to have beautiful spirits and just something unique about their being. So I was doing that for about 2 to 3 years in my neighborhood of East Point, and eventually it did get discouraging when I'm just, well, how do I even get into this industry? Who do I reach out to? It is a very gate-kept, mystical industry to even figure out, how do I even enter? Who is the person that I reach out to at this magazine or this publication to have my work even seen? So for a couple of years, you ask around, and there wasn't anyone, again, when you're talking about the socioeconomic boundaries, there was no one in my direct community that I could ask, hey, do you know someone that I could reach out to? Who should I reach out to in this magazine? And there weren't that many Black women at the time that I even knew to reach out to. So when you talk about barriers, just that access to information about who to even reach out to in this chain of command of things. And so I scoured for about, I would say 2 years to see, okay, what do I do to break into this industry? Because I have the passion for it. I have the yearning for it to get into this industry and tell these stories. And I came across an article by Dana Scruggs, and she had pretty much laid out everything from top to bottom of who you should reach out to. Go on LinkedIn, reaching out to photo editors. But if it hadn't been for that Black woman who saw that there was a need for more Black women in the space and understood the barrier to the information, then I wouldn't even be here today, speaking to you all. So I just think that, that barrier to information is a huge problem in the industry. And if you look around and you only see white men working in your field, then subconsciously you might assume that this is not an industry for me. So, when you have young children or teenagers who are, looking to join a certain career field, if you don't see yourself represented, subconsciously, you just might think that you don't belong.
Right.
So, yeah.
I really appreciate the context and the story about how the barriers for information got solved for you. Just gonna dig into that a little bit more if you don't mind, Rita.
Sure.
How would you suggest we go forward and breaking those kind of barriers to information moving forward?
I think, again, it just has to be that, I guess it can start with us, so if someone comes to me and asks me for information, I try to be as open as possible. But I also think that those who are in quote unquote, power and who really, are at the level, the photo editors at these magazines reaching out and making sure that they're doing their part as well to search for these creators on their own. I think we can't always bear the burden, always. We definitely have a responsibility, but the photo editors at these publications and people who are in power have to do the work as well of making sure, okay, let me go to different gallery exhibitions. Let me make sure that, I'm keeping in tune with who the underrepresented creators are. Right. So I think that that's also a question for the people in power as well. What can they do?
Absolutely.
To open that barrier.
It certainly can't be all on one person or one group of people. It needs to be elevated. And I think that's part of why having this conversation is so important. So I appreciate that, Rita. When it comes to issues that they're facing, Tracy, did you have any comments on that one?
Well, I agree with what Rita said, because, coming from an editorial background, my job is to look and see who is out there and to reach out and to find new talent. People get kind of in their comfort zone, so you need to break out of that. Also, I think as young photographers, you could do portfolio reviews. There's a lot of free events. It's networking, and like Dana said, use LinkedIn as a barrier to reach out to people. I don't know how many people would reach out to me in LinkedIn or even DM me through Instagram. And then I started to build a rapport with them through Instagram. We're chatting. I would chat about their work if I liked something they did. And sometimes it doesn't lead to work right away, but it does lead to kind of familiar connection. And that goes across kind of, I think, with anything that we do. The Loop, we've created this community of women and non-binary photographers that essentially all our creators are underrepresented, but they are part community, but we're also trying to help them generate income and further their career along. So they correspond with each other, they ask each other advice. And what we found is that some of the creators are basically like, I was in the silo by myself. I didn't know if I was doing everything right. I didn't know if I had ideas. I needed technical information and didn't know who to call besides my direct friends who might not be in the industry. So having this community kind of benefited the photographers, and it helps us as well. Partly is we believe that having diverse perspectives helps bring brands to tell more diverse stories. And we are a global company. We want to resonate with the global audience. And I think this makes brands more interesting to the consumer, but it also represents kind of the community that they're in. So if you're selling to, whatever your product you're selling, you want to reach a wide audience. Right. And have and just reach a wide audience, how big or small your product is, and be appreciated for kind of taking a stance and reaching out to those diverse groups of people to create your imagery.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tracy. I think finding a community that allows that kind of growth is very important. Tara, anything to add for the issues?
Yeah, I love the things that Rita and Tracy are saying, and I think thinking about that, seeing yourself in the industry is so important in terms of kind of creating this pipeline to diverse creators. And I also think we have to acknowledge and recognize the kind of limitations to getting started in a creative career, especially something like photography or video and film, where you have to have access to gear. It's not like being a writer where you just writing is free, essentially, you know, pen, pencil, whatever. You have to have a certain level of camera and lenses, lighting, whether you're owning that or renting it. And so that can be a real limiter to and a barrier to entry to the field. And so you have to see yourself in it, in the field, to believe that you can do this. And then you have to have the startup funds, right, to do that. And there's a lot of other things, like a lot of times the work that gets valued, especially in photojournalism and editorial, it's travel work, you know, travel imagery and visuals. So there's this kind of expectation that you will fund your own projects and then maybe pitch it and maybe see it, you know, either in the stock world or publish an editorial, but all of that is on you originally. And, you know, then there's also like late payment terms. So even if you get into the industry, you manage to you know, navigate all of those hurdles, and you do an assignment, or you know, have a commission, a commercial commission, and you're taking on potentially hundreds, thousands of dollars of upfront cost just to do your work. And then if the commissioning editors at the institutions aren't paying you on time, you might have, you know, several hundreds of dollars in fees for those things that the gear, you know, maybe you're paying your assistants, hair and makeup, all of these different things that are required to make the content, to just do your job, cost money, and you're typically not being paid upfront. So that has a really big impact in who can remain in the industry. So I'm always thinking about marginalized creators, underrepresented creators, in terms of barriers to entry and then barriers to retention. Who can actually make a living doing this work? So, and I think that, you know, ultimately we have to be in community, like building these communities, like the work being done by Authority Collective and Women Photograph and The Loop, and so many Black women photographers, so many different spaces of networking and community building are really important. But even that, finding access to community can sometimes be difficult, and you have to know how to find those spaces, what to do, right? I think that the creative fields have for a long time been kind of elitist, or not kind of, very elitist, and we have to really intentionally work to undo those kinds of mentalities and structures that keep people out. So yeah, I think for me, those are some of the main issues that marginalized creators are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really great points. And later on in our session, we're going to kind of talk about some action plans to move forward and hopefully get over some of these barriers. So I really appreciate it. I've been taking a few notes as we go along here so we can come back to some of them. Jen, anything to add there?
Yeah, for sure. I think in the context of digital media licensing, it's also obviously very platform heavy. You are uploading your work to a website. So we do like an annual survey every year, and we also have a user research team that's talked to a lot of our members. What we found was we did a lot of work onboarding a lot of diverse creators. And at the end of the year, we sat down and realized that most of them hadn't participated since joining. So they joined our roster, but they still weren't uploading their content. So we started doing a lot of digging into why this was occurring. So a lot of things that people told us were language barriers, also access to tech. So even if, as Tara mentioned, gear, there's also the gear you need a computer to post-process your work, something that's internet connected. We have a lot of members who actually don't have a computer. They just have their phone or a tablet. So making sure that platforms are accessible to people using mobile devices and not just desktop versions. There's also slow internet speeds. We, especially our members in Africa, were the ones who voted, who told us that they had the slowest internet speeds, and that was interfering with their ability to upload content. So trying to figure out how to get around some of those tech limitations as well to allow people to generate more work. Because we're starting in a place where if you have the best quality gear, the best computer, fastest internet, you can get a lot more of your work online, and then you're better represented in the collection. You have a much larger portfolio, so then you're being seen more often, and it kind of just spirals that way. So on the platform side as well, just equity in terms of making sure people's work is seen. How can we work with our search engines and make sure that there's accurate representation in the results when clients are looking for content? And then it was mentioned already about just having community spaces. So when we onboard diverse creators and they come into a group that is predominantly white male Europeans, and they feel like they're not really part of that community. So figuring out how we can make a more inclusive space for people who are joining, a more welcoming space with more access to education and information needed to get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. I think some of the predominant issues that we've heard a lot about in the last couple of minutes here have had a lot to do with access when it comes to equipment and technology and community. So I think those are some important issues that we can dig into for sure. Wanted to move on to another question. We've got Jen from Stocksy and Tracy from the Loop here. And as I was mentioning in kind of my intro here, I see the demand for clients for diversity. It's a constant theme. So maybe Tracy, you can give us a little bit of an update of what the Loop's doing to kind of keep up with this demand and ensure that it's being filled by the appropriate creators, which I know is primarily your business model. But yeah, just want to loop us into the loop.
Yes, it's definitely our business model. Basically comes down to, obviously, it's giving more opportunities to diverse creators, period. It's also, I think, having diversity behind the scenes with the decision makers, the people who are hiring photographers. Once you have that, things, I think, become more open, because you have those decision makers literally looking at not just their perspective, but they're looking at a broader perspective. One thing we do is we have a brand. Sometimes a brand comes to us and they need a photographer in a specific region. We have photographers globally, and we try to put, sometimes they're asking for diversity within our community. Sometimes they just want someone localized to, do a shoot. And we try to put up basically like who is best for that job, but also making sure that when we're putting up photographers, we are thinking about what the brand is trying to tell, like the story they're trying to tell, where that person is located, and making sure that we are helping those creators like reach those people, if that makes sense. I just think we need to kind of put in practice helping creators and kind of mentorship. Speaking back to what Rita said, it goes back to mentorship and exposure, just helping people get to that certain level in their career, whether they're beginning or they're like well established.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been really, really fun getting to know more about the Loop. So thanks, Tracy. Jen, we've heard a little bit about what Stocksy's up to in trying to elevate creators, but any more you want to add there?
Yeah, I think the kind of our priority right now is onboarding diverse creators and having equitable spaces for them when they're members. So we do a lot of research and outbound recruitment. We meet with people individually, one-on-one, and try to kind of explain what we're about and how they can join us. There's also a lot of work we can do with our existing members. And I think that speaks a little bit to the question Bruno asked in the chat about what the role is for allies. I think actually Tara would be a great person to answer this question because she hosted a workshop for our members called Inclusive Content Creation. And this was something that we did to our members to kind of teach them how to go and photograph communities that they are not a part of, and do that in a way that's researched and respectful, and making sure that they're representing people accurately. And so I do think there's a role for sure for allies who want to help with representation. We also do a lot of education for our members, and we have free education on YouTube as well for people who may want to learn how to join us eventually. And then I think it's just really important to be consistently communicating with our members about what they can create for us that will perform with our clients. So a lot of times you're just guessing. Anybody who's done stock knows I've been a stock photographer for like 12 years now. You're kind of just guessing and hoping for the best. So we try to give people a lot of info, and also at all scales of production. So if you have a huge budget to do a big business shoot, we have stuff for you. If you are just creating content on your phone and don't have a budget for it, we have stuff for you as well. So just making sure that everybody is being invited to participate and getting the information they need to be successful.
Great, thanks, Jen. And maybe we can pivot over then to Tara to maybe talk a little bit more about Bruno's question there as well, seeing as Jen kind of put you on the spot there. So maybe you can answer that question and provide some insight in that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Bruno, thank you for that great question. No, I think for me, this has a lot to do with building community, right? I think content creation, visual media, it's been a very solitary field for a long time, where even if you were working with, on set with assistants and art directors and things, it was still extremely hierarchical, and you might not call those people your community. They're your employees or your employer. But if we can reframe our approach to doing that work and focus on building community, collaboration over competition all the time. I say this on every panel, every talk that I give, collaboration over competition. I think it's so important that we are making this work together. We're making it as a collaborative community. We're making it in community, or we should be making it in collaboration with the people we're photographing, documenting, filming. Any stories that we are telling of any community or individual, we need to be thinking about how we are impacting them, how our presence, our approach, how they might be impacted by this, and explaining that, like being really clear about the process. So, that's what collaboration, I think, looks like. So I would say that what is the role, or, there's definitely a role for ally photographers. It's not just about being a Black content creator or Indigenous content creator or a woman or anything like that. It's actually about our approach to doing this work that can shift and change the paradigm of how visual media is done, of how the creative field is run. So I think every single one of us is called on to think critically about how we do this, why we do this, what we're doing, and how it impacts anyone. How is it impacting the person who's in front of my camera? How is it impacting, the person the mother of the person who's in front of my camera, the colleague of the person who's in front of my camera? What am I saying with this work about what I think about the world, about what I think about the people I'm working with? What am I telling them about themselves? And should I be doing it that way? I'm constantly asking myself those questions and constantly kind of critiquing my own practices. And is that exhausting? Yes, but I think it's important. I think we have to keep doing that. So, that's kind of my perspective on what each of us needs to be doing. Like, what our role is to be authentic in our approach, be critical, be thoughtful, and keep doing that work. Like, keep thinking about, how can I be better? What is the best version of this that I can do? Not just the best image I can make or the best story I can tell, but the best approach that I can have, where I'm thinking about my social impact. Oh, Janelle, you're muted.
Just talking to myself here. Thanks so much, Tara. Rita, I feel like some of the things that Tara was talking about was also kind of in your intro there. Did you have anything else you'd like to add to that? Because it's
Definitely. Tara just spoke on a very important point of my work and just how I've practiced so far is authenticity, being authentic and staying true to your authentic self. So kind of when you spoke earlier about the demand for diverse images, for diverse imagery, I think in 2020, we started to see a lot of businesses and corporations and publications finally saying, okay, well, where can we find these diverse creators, right? So that was where when I entered the space, and just in all transparency, I think, so I was covering stories in my local community, right? So then I started to be hired by these major news networks to go out and document stories. I wasn't prepared for then the communities that I was going to be sent into, if that makes sense. So I'm from Atlanta, but Georgia essentially is, a red, white Republican state. So I started to be, going to be sent out into these communities to document and tell stories so much to where I then had to remind myself, okay, always thinking about the stories that you want to take, because these are going to be representative of you as well. Like you're telling the story, but they're representing you as well. So making sure that the work that I take and the stories that I take are still authentic to me and the message that I want to tell through my work, if that makes sense. So keeping up with that demand has also been about just what Tara was saying, staying authentic to who you are. And sometimes that may be saying, no, I don't think that this job is necessarily for me.
right.
Just staying true to the stories that I want to tell, and also continuously telling those stories, whether I'm commissioned to or not, going out in my neighborhood and finding a new Black-owned business, sitting down with an elder, talking to them, telling their stories. That helps me keep up with the demand in a certain way that is still staying authentic to me and the message that I know that I want to tell, and still properly celebrating and, telling the stories of these communities.
Yeah.
So authenticity plays a huge part there. Just always still like doing those check-ins with yourself, kind of like Tara is saying, okay, like what is the message that I want to tell? What am I trying to say through these stories? And just making sure that I'm always staying true to that, no matter where my career takes me as far as the stories that I'm being commissioned for publications and things like that.
That's great. Thanks, Rita, for that perspective. And Josie, I just post a link to your newsletter, so I look forward to checking that
out. I just started a newsletter. This is like a little tidbit. So Josiane Faubert is the one who brought me into this panel, and I do want to, when we're talking about underrepresented creators, she has a company that she started called Pishastock.
Yes.
It is a stock photo library of beautiful Afrocentric images of people doing everyday things, living everyday life, love, cooking, exercising, jogging. It's really beautiful. So I think also representing the creators who are already doing the work, Pishastock is a great example of that. So
yeah. I was going to bring that up here very shortly. So thanks for beating me to me, Rita. Really appreciate that. Thanks again, everybody, for just this great conversation. Maybe while we're talking about different kind of resources and stuff like that, Tara, can you tell us a little bit more about your work with the Authority Collective?
Yes, and thank you for asking about that. I'm going to drop a few links into the chat as I talk about this. So Authority Collective is a global community of women and non-binary visual creators of color. And it's an organization that leads interventions into the visual media industries, such as the Photo Bill of Rights and the Guide to Inclusive Photography. So we care deeply about kind of strengthening community internally and sort of shifting the way that visual work is done, as well as building community and providing resources, whether it's in photography, film, VR, AR, et cetera. So I'm going to drop a few of these links into the chat. This is Authority Collective. We have a new website coming out soon, so I'm excited about that update. And the Photo Bill of Rights is a project that we convened and we worked with, or Authority Collective convened, and we worked with authors at Diversified Photo, Everyday Projects, Women Photograph, Indigenous Photograph. So there are a lot of really wonderful organizations that many of which were founded in 2017, 2016, that were thinking about this problem of, gender and racial inequity and disparities, financial precarity and inequity in the industry, and also the kind of difference between the global south and the global north and how it gets represented, who gets to represent it. So these organizations are really deeply ingrained in representing, producing databases to show women and non-binary photographers. Authority Collective we haven't had a database because I felt like there were many other databases that we didn't need to kind of reinvent the wheel, but we are actually going to have a database of our women and non-binary creators of color coming out soon. And I think it's important that Authority Collective specifically is Black women, AAPI women, Indigenous women, Latina women, QTPOC. It's very intersectional, and it's always trying to think about how do we do solidarity work together? How do we represent, our communities authentically and thoughtfully? And how are we, being really, productively critical and progressing the industry together? And so that's been kind of the central configuration of what Authority Collective does. And here's another resource that I think is a pretty good one, the Guide to Inclusive Photography, which talks a little bit about what Jen mentioned we did with the Stocksy workshop, where we're thinking about, okay, how do you tell stories in communities that are not your own? How do you tell stories in communities that are your own? Because I also want to kind of push back on the idea that if you're a woman photographer, you do a really good job of, a feminist job of representing women, or if you're a Black photographer, you do a really good job of representing Black communities. Any content creator can adhere to white supremacist or misogynist ideas, unfortunately. None of us is immune to those kinds of problematic ways of viewing the world, especially because we've all been raised on really problematic views of the world. So we have to kind of constantly and always be assessing our own approaches and being in community with others to think about how we can do that really important work of kind of pushing back against those centuries of misrepresentation. And so I think a lot of these different organizations are doing that. And I wanted to also speak about something that Rita mentioned that I think is really important to point out, is that it's been amazing to see the shift in willingness, the kind of willingness of editorial organizations, news organizations to feature communities of color, to tell different kinds of stories about refugees and immigrants and Black and Brown and Indigenous and queer folks. I would say people and communities that had been previously ignored or misrepresented. And a lot of that happened in the shift in 2020. And so we see this influx of diverse photographers, but diversity is not equity and diversity is not inclusion. And so we have to really be attentive to how are we making this a space that people can stay in, right? I think it's so true that it was difficult to understand how to access the industry. And then all of a sudden people said, oh, wait, we've been kind of racist and elitist, and let's reach out to Black women photographers. Let's do this thing, which is amazing and wonderful. But how do we maintain that? How do we actually shift the structure of our industries so that we continue to invite diverse photographers, that we look beyond, social media and these spaces that are kind of easy, that we think about pipelines? Because ultimately, I think editors and commissioning parties were reaching out and are reaching out to people who have already had the opportunity to build up a brand online, or who have already has access to camera equipment and all of these different things that you need to succeed. So how do we encourage the industry to actually be instrumental in building those pipelines and helping a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old woman of color see that she can be a photographer, and helping get her there? I was just at the Lost Photos Project Awards this weekend, which is this wonderful organization here in LA that supports young girls and non-binary photographers of color who are working to get into the industry and how to understand how to do that. And we need that, and a lot of that work is coming from nonprofits instead of coming from the people in the industry who have the money to do it, right? So it's like volunteer labor, like what we do at Authority Collective is all volunteer, totally unfunded. And we've been doing that for 5 years, supporting women of color around the globe. we need the industry to actually like invest in this and not just wait for us to do all the labor. And then they're like, oh, great, thanks for elevating all of those people. Now we'll hire them. Like they need to be invested in making that happen as well. I just had a soapbox about that real quick.
I think that's really important. I think that, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to how the industry is operating. And there's been a lot of kind of the grunt work done by groups like Authority Collective, which we are now benefiting from. But taking more of a top-down approach of how we can manage this moving forward is really important. On that note, I wanted to just see if there was anybody else in the panel who had any other kind of groups that they'd like to call out, or opportunities for involvement.
Well, I'll go. Well, obviously it's the Loop for me, but I've also am a big supporter of Authority Collective, Diversify Photo. There's so many organizations out there that are not, that, like Tara said, they have been around, they had the foresight to start seeing we needed this before the pandemic, and then 2020 definitely was that catalyst to make everyone pay attention that we need to hear these diverse voices. So, and I believe in mentorship as well. There's a lot of organizations that are coming up and where they're kind of helping young people, like Tara said, like get into photography, or even some of the photo agencies that like the different reps that are out there are starting to have mentorship programs to really teach people about the photo business, because it's a business and there's different aspects of the business. So, your editorial, your commercial, fine art. How do young people navigate this? Like, my experience, I came in, I studied photography. I wanted to be a fine artist. I knew nothing about commercial photography, about editorial photography. I was just going to create art because my art's going to be great and people are going to love me and buy my art. And then you realize that's not how the industry works. That's not how the world works. And when I started learning more about the business side, I kind of picked the angle. I realized I didn't want to be a commercial shooter myself. I wasn't happy. It wasn't my thing to kind of create under like deadlines and pressure. It just was too much for me, but I like being behind the scenes. And I really learned the business side of photography by becoming a studio manager and learning how a photo business works. And when I started out, even when with the photographers that I worked with, I was the only person of color usually around. And I just thought that's the way the industry worked until I started meeting other creators and other photographers and people, and also people behind the scenes that could kind of like, oh, I have a chance to do this. I didn't think about being a photo editor until I took my kind of fine art background. And it's like, oh, I can do research. I have a good visual eye. Like that led to other things. And that starting at that level really helped me just learn kind of the business side of photography. And a lot of people don't think of starting out as a photo assistant, but like you have people like Tara and Rita. I'm sure if someone reached out and wanted to intern for them or assist them, depending on their skill level, they may take them on as a second or third assistant, just so that it gives them kind of that foray into this industry.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tracy. And I think that actually kind of parlays pretty well into what I think will probably be our last question. We got 6 more minutes left together. And that's just kind of culminating on a lot of the things we've already talked about. And a lot of the things we've answered this question in, I think, a lot of different ways, but wanted to kind of bring it up and kind of wrap it up with its final question of, if diverse industry starts with diverse creators, how can we better support creators? There's been a lot of talk about community and technology and funding and that sort of thing, but I'd love to hear kind of everybody's strategy of what we can do better.
I'll go. I think money. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that have a lot of money that they could be using to support diverse creators. As was mentioned before, for our part, we're going to start looking at grants for underrepresented creators. I think education, accessible education, free education, the more that people can understand about how they can earn a living from photography, the more they'll be able to do it. We're also seeking out people who may not know about stock media licensing. A lot of people still don't know that that is a thing that you can do to make money, especially somewhat passively after you've done the initial work. And then just making sure that your platforms are equitable. Sorry, my dog has a lot to say on this as well.
Phoebe's opinion is very important. Thanks so much, Jen. Rita, do you want to have some final thoughts on how we can better support our creators?
Yes, definitely. I love the mention of financial support, but something that is maybe like another talking point that may be a little, but I know a lot of people, like me, myself, I would consider myself a first generation creative of my family, right? So that did not come with a lot of understanding. That didn't necessarily come with a lot of nurturing and support in that way. So somehow like touching these younger people who might be coming from families who might not understand exactly what a photojournalist does, what a photo editor does, understand that these are actual like substantial careers that you can actually have influence with. So touching them also just in a way of providing that emotional and mental support along with the financial to let them know that this is even possible. Because I know for me, it wasn't until my 20s, my late 20s, to where I even was able to consider this as a career, and it was kind of met with a lot of friction. And so I know a lot of people who may have these ambitions may have people around them telling them that it's not even a possibility. So providing also like that financial support, but also again, that mentorship, and whether, I don't know if it's going to schools or how to find these artists, letting them know that it is actually possible and it's a possibility is huge.
I love that, Rita. That's so important. And thinking about that pipeline again, I think, we individually can go to elementary schools, high schools, colleges, volunteer our time and say, hey, do y'all know what a photojournalist is and does? Like, they can look like me, they can look like you, they can look like anyone. And this is what the work is. And just being willing to actually engage the community and give back and imagine, what did I need to hear at 15 or 12 or 10 to understand that I could do this? But also I think part of that is it's important community level work to explain where visual media is coming from. There's millions or billions really of photos and videos circulating all the time, but I have a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they have a pretty good understanding of that because they see me, and their dad's also a photographer. They see us working. But I think that that's rare actually for young people, for youth, to have a really clear connection between media and not, I don't mean like influencer content creators. They understand that who's making TikToks, but understanding who's making the images on the front page of the New York Times, who is making these like video reels and that we see at CNN, and what does that look like? Who is making these images that I see in the magazines, advertising? So helping them to have a better grasp of not only that they can become these creatives, but also just visual media literacy. Like, that is so important in our world. So I think all of those things are kind of connected, and that's a thing that we can sort of individually do. But also, I love what Jen was saying earlier about being in a position at Stocksy to both offer grants, but to recognize that technology is a limitation. Technology is a barrier to retention, a barrier to access. We have to be having those kinds of conversations, because just opening the door to a room is not making space for someone to be in that room. It is not making them feel like they can speak up. And it's certainly not offering them the keys so that they can, be a leader in that space. So how do we level up from diversity of just saying, sure, you can come in, to, hi, I would like you to be, helping set the structure and having the power and authority and access to shift the paradigm. That's what I think that we can and should be doing, hopefully, with, to elevate marginalized creators.
Janelle, you're muted again.
Gosh, I just wanted to give Tracy a quick moment here before we end the session to jump in on the how we can support our artists.
Oh, yes. I kind of agree with what both Tara and Rita said. It really stems from access, community. I'm a big champion on community. Just your community doesn't have to be. Obviously, there's all the groups that we mentioned, but you can start smaller. Like you can reach out to someone on Instagram and just start a conversation, and LinkedIn. It's really reaching out to people who are the hiring managers and decision makers, but it's also reaching out to your peers and forming that community so that you have someone that you can bounce ideas off to. If you have a community of artists that you work with, maybe you can borrow equipment. You may not have, like, with access comes, obviously it's money, but you may not have the income to have all the equipment you need. But if your community members have that, you may be able to kind of work out some type of system where you can share resources so that it's not just relying on you and the income that you have or don't have. It just stems to me, community and reaching out, networking. Don't be afraid. Just don't be afraid. Like, you have to take a chance on yourself.
Love that. Well, we are at time here. So I just really, really want to thank everybody for their time today. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Jen. This was a really great conversation. And also a big thanks to the DMLA and all of our sponsors again for allowing this to be a part of the conference this year.
Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Jen and Rita and Tracy. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you,
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.